Somewhere in a shipwreck at the bottom of the Mediterranean, divers once pulled up a lump of corroded bronze so unremarkable that it sat in a museum drawer for decades before anyone realized what it actually was. When scientists finally looked closely, with X-rays and modern imaging equipment, they found gears. Tiny, precisely cut bronze gears, dozens of them, fitted together with a level of mechanical sophistication that simply should not have existed 2,000 years before the modern clock was ever invented. That object is only the beginning of tonight's story. Across the ancient world, in workshops and temples and quiet river valleys, ordinary people kept building things that, by every reasonable expectation of what their era could achieve, were centuries ahead of their time. Some of these objects still cannot be fully explained. Others can, and the explanation is almost more astonishing than the mystery. Settle in, because we are going to go through 30 of them, one at a time, starting with that very same lump of bronze pulled from a sunken Roman ship. Number 30. The Antikythera mechanism. In the year 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers working off the small island of Antikythera, caught in rough weather, took shelter near a rocky stretch of coastline and decided to dive there out of curiosity. What they found on the seabed was a Roman-era shipwreck dated to somewhere around the 1st century BCE, scattered with statues, coins and pottery that had been sitting undisturbed for roughly 2,000 years. Among the recovered debris was a small, unassuming lump of corroded bronze that nobody paid much attention to at first. It sat largely ignored until a researcher, examining it more closely years later, noticed something that did not belong in any object from the ancient world: a gear wheel, with teeth cut into it with remarkable precision. Further investigation, stretched out over the better part of a century and eventually assisted by advanced imaging technology capable of seeing through layers of corroded metal, revealed that this single lump actually contained more than 30 separate interlocking bronze gears, originally housed inside a wooden case roughly the size of a large book. Inscriptions on the surviving fragments describe astronomical functions, and researchers eventually determined that the device had been built to track the movements of the sun and moon through the zodiac, to predict eclipses years in advance, and even to display the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games and other pan-Hellenic athletic festivals. It accounted for the irregular, non-uniform motion of the moon across the sky, using a clever arrangement of gears mounted slightly off-center from one another. A genuinely elegant mechanical solution to a real astronomical problem. The most significant breakthrough in understanding the device came only in the early 21st century, when a research team used a specially constructed X-ray scanner, originally developed for industrial inspection purposes, to peer directly through the corroded bronze fragments without needing to physically separate or damage them further. This scanning process revealed thousands of tiny inscribed characters, many of them invisible to the naked eye and completely obscured by centuries of corrosion, effectively functioning as a detailed instruction manual describing how the mechanism's various dials and pointers were meant to be read and interpreted by its original user. Piecing together this hidden text allowed researchers to finally reconstruct a reasonably complete working model of the entire mechanism, confirming that it tracked not only the sun, moon, and eclipse cycles, but also incorporated a 19-year lunar calendar cycle known to Greek astronomers, along with a separate dial tracking a longer cycle used specifically to predict the timing of eclipses with a genuine degree of practical accuracy. Nothing else built with this level of mechanical complexity is known to survive from anywhere in the ancient world, and nothing comparable would reappear in the historical record for well over 1,000 years, not until European clockmakers began producing complex geared mechanisms in the 14th century. This has left researchers with a genuinely puzzling gap. Either the skill needed to produce something like the Antikythera mechanism was exceptionally rare even in its own time, confined to a small handful of workshops whose other creations simply did not survive. Or there are other devices like it still waiting to be found, sitting quietly at the bottom of the sea, or buried beneath layers of dust in a collection nobody has properly examined yet. Some historians have connected the device's construction to the island of Rhodes, home to a renowned school of astronomy and mechanical engineering during this period, and to a tradition of geared technology that appears to trace back to earlier Greek thinkers working with primitive calculating devices. Whatever workshop actually built it, the mechanism represents a genuine peak of ancient engineering achievement, one that vanished from human memory so completely that it took modern scientists the better part of a century, working with a corroded lump barely larger than a fist, just to understand what they were even looking at. And as remarkable as gears cut from bronze may be, the next piece of ancient technology on our list involves a very different kind of precision, one measured not in mechanical parts but in the microscopic structure of metal itself, forged into blades so sharp and so strong that centuries of later swordsmiths simply could not figure out how to reproduce them. Number 29. Damascus steel blades. Crusader-era accounts describe swords capable of a genuinely startling feat, cutting cleanly through a silk scarf as it drifted down through the air, and in other tellings, splitting a lesser sword in two without losing their own edge. These weapons, produced primarily in the Middle East between roughly the 3rd and 17th centuries, became known to the Western world as Damascus steel, named for the city where European crusaders most often encountered them being sold and traded, even though the steel itself was not necessarily forged there. The blades were instantly recognizable by their surface pattern, a rippling, wave-like texture running through the metal that looked almost like flowing water frozen in place, a pattern that formed naturally during the forging process rather than being decorated on afterward. The raw material behind these legendary blades originated even further away, in the furnaces of southern India, where smiths had developed a method of producing an unusually pure, high-carbon steel known as woots, shaped into small ingots and traded westward along established trade routes for centuries before ever reaching the swordsmiths of the Middle East. Modern metallurgical analysis of surviving Damascus blades has revealed something genuinely startling embedded within their structure. Cementite nanowires and, in some specimens, carbon nanotube-like structures formed naturally during a repeated, carefully controlled process of forging and heating without the smiths themselves having any concept of atomic structure or chemistry in the way we understand it today. These structures likely contributed directly to the exceptional combination of hardness and flexibility that made the blades so famous, a combination that is normally difficult to achieve since harder steel tends to become correspondingly more brittle. The forging process itself required Middle Eastern smiths to work the imported woots ingots with an unusually careful, low-temperature approach, heating the metal only enough to make it workable without ever allowing it to reach the higher temperatures typically used by European swordsmiths of the same era, since overheating the ingot would destroy the very carbide structures responsible for the blade's famous pattern and its exceptional performance. This meant that producing a single finished blade could require an experienced smith many days of patient repeated heating, hammering and cooling, gradually drawing the metal out into its final shape while carefully preserving the internal banding that gave the steel both its distinctive surface appearance and its unusual combination of strength and flexibility, a process that left very little room for error and that could not be meaningfully rushed without ruining months of accumulated craftsmanship in the ingot itself. The technique for producing genuine Damascus steel was eventually lost sometime around the 18th century, likely due to a combination of factors including the depletion of specific trace minerals within the original Indian ore deposits used to produce woots steel, along with the gradual breakdown of the long-distance trade networks that had carried the raw ingots westward for so many centuries. Swordsmiths across the following centuries attempted repeatedly to reproduce the original technique, and while some modern metallurgists using contemporary laboratory equipment have managed to recreate blades with a similar internal structure and similar surface pattern, the original medieval smiths achieved this same result using nothing more than a charcoal furnace. Careful control of temperature by eye and by feel, and knowledge passed down verbally from master to apprentice across many generations, refined through what must have been an enormous amount of trial and error long before anyone understood why the process actually worked. As deadly as a well-forged blade could be in the hands of a soldier, it was nothing compared to a weapon that could turn the sea itself into a wall of unquenchable fire, and that particular secret, unlike the recipe for Damascus steel, has never been fully recovered at all. Number 28. Greek fire. Byzantine naval commanders in the 7th century possessed a weapon so devastating and so closely guarded that its exact composition remains genuinely unknown even today, more than 1,000 years after it was first deployed. Known to history as Greek fire, the substance was a liquid incendiary weapon, sprayed from bronze tubes mounted on the front of Byzantine warships using a mechanism that functions somewhat like an early flamethrower, capable of igniting on contact and, most alarmingly for anyone caught in its path, continuing to burn even when it landed on water, making it almost impossible to extinguish through any conventional means available at the time. Historical accounts describe Greek fire being used to devastating effect during the Arab sieges of Constantinople in the late 7th and early 8th centuries, helping the Byzantine Empire survive assaults that might otherwise have ended its existence centuries before it eventually fell. Enemy fleets caught by the weapon are described in surviving accounts as being thrown into panic, their ships catching fire and their crews forced to abandon vessels rather than face a fire that clung to timber, sails and skin in a way that ordinary flames simply did not. The psychological effect of the weapon was, by every surviving account, nearly as devastating as its physical destructiveness, since facing an enemy who could seemingly command fire itself to move and burn according to their will left many opposing sailors deeply unsettled even before battle had properly begun. The delivery system itself represented a genuine mechanical achievement in its own right, separate from the mystery of the liquid's exact chemical composition. Byzantine warships were fitted with a bronze siphon mounted at the bow, connected through pipework to a heated reservoir kept below deck, likely pressurized using some form of pump or bellows mechanism to force the liquid through the tube with enough force to project it a meaningful distance toward an enemy vessel, all while somehow keeping the substance from igniting prematurely inside the ship's own equipment. Maintaining and safely operating this apparatus in the middle of a naval engagement aboard a moving, rolling ship, while simultaneously managing whatever ignition method was used to set the projected liquid alight, would have demanded a genuinely skilled and highly trained specialist crew, one whose specific expertise the Byzantine state guarded every bit as jealously as the chemical formula itself. The Byzantine state treated the formula for Greek fire as one of its most closely guarded state secrets, restricting knowledge of its production to a small circle of trusted individuals and deliberately avoiding writing down the complete recipe in any surviving document, a level of operational secrecy that ultimately worked almost too well, since the exact formula was lost entirely once the line of people who knew it was broken by war, plague, or simple mortality sometime before the empire's eventual collapse in the 15th century. Byzantine tradition attributed the weapon's original invention to a Greek engineer who fled to Constantinople from Syria during the 7th century, and later emperors are recorded as having warned their own successors, in surviving private instructional writings, intended only for the eyes of the next ruler, never to reveal the formula's secret to any foreign power under any circumstances, treating the knowledge as being every bit as valuable to the empire's continued survival as any army or fleet it possessed. Modern historians and chemists have proposed a range of possible ingredients based on descriptions of the weapon's properties, including naphtha, sulfur, and quicklime, but no proposed formula has ever fully replicated every documented characteristic of the original substance, particularly its reported ability to continue burning on the surface of open water. What survives today is essentially a weapon with a known effect but an unknown cause. A rare case where we have overwhelming evidence that something worked exactly as described without any complete certainty about how it was actually made. Fire that could not be put out by water was frightening enough for any 10th century sailor to witness. But elsewhere in the medieval world, another weapon was quietly being forged that carried an entirely different kind of menace, one etched permanently into the blade itself in a language its own makers may not have fully understood. Number 27. The Ulfberht swords. Beginning around the 9th century, Viking-era warriors across northern Europe began carrying swords stamped with a peculiar inscription along the blade, reading roughly as plus VLFBERHT+, a name whose exact origin and meaning remains debated among historians to this day. What makes these particular swords so remarkable is not simply the inscription itself, but the material used to forge them. Modern metallurgical testing on surviving Ulfberht blades has revealed a steel with an unusually high and unusually consistent carbon content and a strikingly low level of slag impurities, a combination that should not have been achievable using the iron smelting technology generally available in Europe during this period, which typically produced a much lower quality, more brittle metal riddled with imperfections. The steel used in genuine Ulfberht blades appears to closely match the qualities of crucible steel, a production method that required temperatures hot enough to fully melt the iron into a liquid state, allowing impurities to be removed far more thoroughly than the bloomery furnaces commonly used across most of medieval Europe at the time. This particular refinement process was known and practiced in parts of Central Asia and the Islamic world during this same period, connected to the same broader tradition of high-quality steel production that also produced the Wootz ingots discussed in relation to Damascus steel blades, suggesting that raw material, or perhaps even finished ingots of high-quality steel, may have travelled an extraordinarily long distance along trade routes stretching from Central Asia through Russia and eventually into Viking Scandinavia, likely moving along the same river trade networks that connected Norse merchants to Byzantine and Islamic markets far to the south and east. Adding a further layer of intrigue, researchers studying surviving examples have found that a significant number of blades bearing the Ulfberht inscription were actually poor quality forgeries, produced by less skilled smiths attempting to imitate the prestige associated with the genuine name, complete with misspelled versions of the inscription itself, evidence that the name had become something close to a recognized brand, valuable enough to counterfeit centuries before anything resembling modern trademark law existed to prevent exactly this kind of imitation. Out of roughly 170 surviving swords bearing some version of the inscription recovered across northern Europe, researchers estimate that only a comparatively small fraction, perhaps around 40 examples, actually display the correctly spelled inscription paired with the genuine high-quality crucible steel, meaning that the majority of blades bearing the famous name were, in fact, the inferior imitations rather than the real superior article, a detail that adds a genuinely interesting layer of ancient commercial deception to what already reads as a fairly remarkable metallurgical mystery. A genuine Ulfberht blade, wielded by a warrior who could afford one, would have offered a significant, potentially decisive advantage in personal combat, holding a sharper edge for longer and resisting the kind of catastrophic bending or shattering that could turn a lesser weapon into a liability in the middle of a fight. Somewhere between Central Asian furnaces and Scandinavian battlefields, an extraordinarily advanced material had found its way into the hands of ordinary Viking warriors who likely had no idea just how far the steel in their weapon had actually travelled to reach them. If a blade forged from smuggled foreign steel seems remarkable, consider a weapon that its inventor supposedly built using nothing but mirrors and sunlight, a claim so bold that people are still arguing about whether it could possibly have worked. Number 26. Archimedes' heat ray. According to accounts written centuries after the events they describe, the Greek mathematician and inventor Archimedes, during the Roman siege of the Sicilian city of Syracuse in 214 to 212 BCE, devised a weapon capable of setting enemy ships ablaze using nothing more than sunlight and an array of carefully positioned mirrors. The basic concept, as later writers described it, involved arranging a large number of polished bronze or silver mirrors along the city's defensive walls, angled so that each one reflected sunlight onto the exact same point on an approaching Roman vessel, concentrating enough solar energy at that single point to ignite the ship's wooden hull or sails. Whether this weapon actually existed in the form later writers described it, or whether it represents an exaggeration or outright legend that grew up around Archimedes' already well-documented reputation as a brilliant engineer, remains a genuinely open question among historians, since the earliest surviving accounts of the siege itself, written by contemporary or near-contemporary historians, make no mention of any heat weapon at all, describing instead a range of other ingenious defensive devices Archimedes is credited with designing, including massive cranes capable of lifting enemy ships partially out of the water and dropping them or overturning them entirely. The heat ray story appears only in considerably later sources, written centuries after Archimedes' own lifetime, which has led many modern historians to treat it with real skepticism. That skepticism has not stopped numerous researchers and television programs from attempting to test whether such a weapon could actually have worked using the technology available in the 3rd century BCE. Several of these experiments have managed to ignite a stationary wooden target using an array of mirrors under ideal, cloudless conditions, but reproducing the same result against a moving ship on open water, where the reflected light would need to remain precisely focused on a single point, despite waves, ship movement, and the physical difficulty of a large number of individual mirror operators all coordinating their aim simultaneously, has proven considerably more difficult to demonstrate convincingly. Regardless of the heat ray's uncertain status, Archimedes' more thoroughly documented siege engines are impressive enough on their own merits to explain why his reputation as a military engineer endured so strongly in the historical record. Contemporary accounts describe a device sometimes called the Claw of Archimedes, a massive crane-like arm fitted with a large metal hook capable of grappling the bow of an approaching Roman ship, lifting it partially out of the water and then releasing it suddenly, capsizing the vessel or smashing it against the rocks beneath the city's fortified harbour walls. A documented weapon that historians treat with considerably less skepticism than the heat ray specifically, because it appears consistently across multiple independent, more contemporary sources. Even the researchers most sympathetic to the idea that some version of the heat ray existed generally concede that it would have been of limited practical use against a genuinely mobile naval target, though a more limited version, perhaps used to blind or distract enemy sailors and rowers rather than to actually set ships on fire, remains a somewhat more plausible possibility given what we know of both the available materials and the physics involved. Real or embellished, the legend of Archimedes' mirrors has endured for over 2,000 years precisely because it sits at that fascinating boundary where ancient ingenuity and modern skepticism have never quite managed to fully settle the question either way. From weapons built to destroy, we turn now to a substance the Romans invented to build, one so far ahead of its time that engineers are still studying it today, hoping to steal its secrets for the modern world's own crumbling infrastructure. Number 25, Roman self-healing concrete. Structures built by Roman engineers roughly 2,000 years ago including sections of aqueducts, market buildings, and the enormous dome of the Pantheon in Rome, remain standing to this day, while a great deal of modern concrete infrastructure, poured within the last century, has already begun cracking, crumbling, and requiring extensive repair or outright replacement. For a long time, this durability gap puzzled materials scientists, since modern concrete production techniques are, in most respects, far more precise and consistent than anything available to Roman builders. The answer, it turned out, lay in a specific ingredient the Romans used, almost by circumstance rather than deliberate chemical insight: volcanic ash, sourced from deposits around the Bay of Naples, mixed directly into their concrete formula alongside lime and seawater. Detailed chemical analysis of surviving Roman concrete samples, particularly those taken from structures built directly in contact with seawater, such as harbour piers and breakwaters, revealed that a chemical reaction between the volcanic ash, the lime, and the seawater itself produced a rare mineral called aluminous tobermarite, which continued forming and growing within tiny cracks in the concrete for centuries after the structure was originally built. Rather than simply resisting damage the way modern concrete is designed to do, Roman marine concrete appears to have genuinely strengthened itself over time as seawater percolated through microscopic fractures, triggering additional mineral growth that filled and sealed those very same cracks, effectively giving the material a rudimentary form of self-healing that modern engineers have historically had to design in a completely different, far more artificial way if they have managed to achieve anything resembling it at all. Modern Portland cement, the standard ingredient in most contemporary concrete production, behaves in almost the opposite manner when exposed to seawater over long periods, since the chemical reactions involved tend to produce cracking and structural weakening rather than any comparable strengthening effect, which is a significant part of why so much modern coastal and marine infrastructure requires expensive, frequent maintenance and eventual replacement, while a 2,000-year-old Roman harbour structure can still be found standing largely intact along parts of the Mediterranean coastline. Roman engineers also understood something else about their concrete that modern builders have only recently begun to fully appreciate: deliberately varying the specific mixture and aggregate material used at different heights and locations within a single structure, depending on the particular load-bearing demands of that section. The dome of the Pantheon in Rome, still the largest unreinforced concrete dome anywhere in the world, nearly 2,000 years after its completion, was poured using a formula that gradually shifted from denser basalt aggregate near the base of the dome to considerably lighter, more porous volcanic pumice near its very centre, deliberately reducing the structure's weight exactly where it needed to be lightest to remain standing without collapsing under its own mass, a level of deliberate material engineering that modern architects continue to study closely today. Researchers studying this phenomenon in recent years have actively worked to reproduce a modern version of Roman concrete, hoping to apply its self-healing properties to contemporary construction projects, particularly along coastlines and in other marine environments where standard concrete tends to fail fastest and where the cost of frequent repair or replacement is highest. It remains a genuinely striking situation. A civilization working without any understanding of modern chemistry managed to accidentally produce a building material that has, in some very specific and measurable ways, simply outperformed its 20th and 21st century successor. And nowhere does that ancient material prove its worth more dramatically than beneath the waves themselves, where Roman engineers built entire harbours directly into the open sea, using techniques that modern marine construction still struggles to match. Number 24. Caesarea's underwater harbour. Along the coast of what is now Israel, the Roman client king Herod the Great commissioned the construction of an enormous artificial harbour at the city of Caesarea, completed sometime around 15 BCE, built to serve a coastline that otherwise offered no natural sheltered anchorage for ships along an entire stretch of the eastern Mediterranean. Constructing a harbour of this scale directly in open water, without any natural bay or inlet to work from, required Roman engineers to essentially build enormous concrete breakwaters and piers from scratch, poured and set directly underwater using wooden forms that were sunk into place and then filled with a specially formulated hydraulic concrete mixture capable of curing and hardening even while fully submerged. This underwater construction technique depended entirely on the same volcanic ash-based concrete formula that gave Roman marine structures their remarkable long-term durability. But building an entire functioning harbour with it required an additional layer of genuine engineering sophistication, since the wooden forms used to shape the underwater concrete had to be constructed on land, floated out to the correct position, carefully weighted and sunk precisely where needed, and then filled with concrete that had to be mixed and transported without losing its ability to properly cure once submerged. Roman writers of the period describe the specific volcanic ash used in this hydraulic mixture as having been shipped by the boatload across considerable distances from the region around Naples, specifically for major marine construction projects like this one, indicating that Roman engineers had identified, through long practical experience, exactly which particular volcanic material produced the chemical reaction needed to set properly underwater, and had organized a reliable, large-scale supply chain specifically to support that need. Archaeological surveys of the harbour's surviving remains, conducted using modern underwater excavation techniques, have revealed a genuinely enormous engineering project involving an estimated tens of thousands of tons of concrete and stone, forming breakwaters that once enclosed a harbour considerably larger than many modern port facilities of comparable purpose, complete with dedicated areas for loading and unloading cargo, and even early versions of a lighthouse and other navigational aids to help incoming ships find safe passage. Over the centuries following its construction, geological surveys have determined that the harbour gradually sank beneath the waves, likely due to a combination of factors including the settling and compacting of the ash and rubble foundation the Romans had used to build up the sea floor before laying their concrete, combined with broader long-term shifts in relative sea level and possible seismic activity affecting the eastern Mediterranean coastline over the following 2,000 years. Rather than destroying the evidence of what the Romans had actually built, this gradual submersion preserved much of the harbour's original structure remarkably well, protected from the kind of erosion and weathering that above-water ruins typically suffer, giving modern marine archaeologists an unusually complete picture of exactly how Roman engineers managed to build a fully functioning deep-water port directly into open ocean using nothing more than volcanic ash, lime, wooden forms, and an enormous amount of careful planning and human labour. From concrete poured directly into the sea, we move now to a single column of solid iron standing upright in the open air for over 1,600 years that has stubbornly refused to do the one thing iron almost always eventually does. Number 23. The Iron Pillar of Delhi. Standing within a historic mosque complex in Delhi, India, a solid iron pillar roughly 23 feet tall and weighing several tons has stood exposed to open air, rain, and the region's notoriously harsh, humid monsoon climate for approximately 1,600 years, according to an inscription on the pillar itself that historians generally date to the reign of a Gupta-era ruler sometime around the 4th or 5th century CE. Under normal circumstances, an iron object of this size, left exposed to that kind of weather for even a fraction of that time, would be expected to rust extensively, likely losing significant structural integrity or crumbling away entirely within a matter of decades or, at most, a couple of centuries. The pillar's remarkable resistance to corrosion puzzled metallurgists for a very long time, until detailed chemical analysis eventually revealed the answer lay not in any exotic or mysterious material, but in the specific composition and manufacturing process used by ancient Indian ironworkers. The iron used to forge the pillar contains an unusually high concentration of phosphorus, along with comparatively low levels of sulfur and manganese, a chemical profile that resulted from the particular type of iron ore and smelting process used by smiths in this region of ancient India. When exposed to moisture over an extended period, this phosphorus-rich iron gradually formed a thin, extremely stable protective layer of iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate on its outer surface, a passive coating that has continued protecting the metal underneath from the kind of ongoing oxidation that would otherwise cause it to rust away. What makes this discovery particularly striking is that ancient Indian smiths achieved this protective effect without any understanding of the underlying chemistry involved, likely as an incidental result of their particular regional ironworking traditions and the specific iron ore deposits they had available to work with, rather than through any deliberate attempt to engineer corrosion resistance in the way a modern metallurgist might approach the same problem today. Researchers studying the pillar closely have noted that the protective phosphate layer did not form instantly after its construction, but instead developed gradually over a period stretching across several centuries, alternating through repeated cycles of forming during India's dry seasons and partially dissolving during periods of heavier monsoon rainfall, until the layer eventually thickened and stabilized enough to provide the pillar with the essentially permanent protection it still exhibits today, meaning the very climate conditions that would normally be expected to destroy an ordinary iron object over time instead played a direct, necessary role in creating the protective barrier that has kept this particular pillar intact. The pillar itself was also forged using a technique involving the repeated heating, hammering, and welding together of multiple smaller iron blooms into a single solid mass, a process that would have required an enormous amount of skilled labor and precise temperature control to produce a finished object of this size and structural consistency using furnace technology available in ancient India. Modern attempts to replicate the pillar's exact corrosion-resistant properties using contemporary industrial methods have found the process considerably more difficult to reproduce reliably than the original ancient smiths apparently managed. A genuinely humbling reminder that centuries of accumulated regional craftsmanship, even without any formal scientific understanding behind it, occasionally produced results that modern engineering, for all its advantages, still finds challenging to match. As remarkable as an iron pillar that refuses to rust may be, the next object on our list achieves something that sounds almost like a magic trick: a drinking cup that changes colour depending on which direction the light happens to be shining from. Number 22. The Lycurgus Cup. Dating to somewhere around the 4th century CE, a Roman glass cup known today as the Lycurgus Cup, decorated with an elaborately carved scene depicting the mythological Greek king Lycurgus being punished by the god Dionysus, possesses a genuinely startling optical property that went unexplained by modern science for a remarkably long time. When lit from the front, with light bouncing off the cup's surface, the glass appears a solid jade green colour. When lit from behind, with light passing directly through the glass itself, the very same cup appears a deep glowing red, a dramatic colour shift that has no equivalent among ordinary coloured glass objects from this period, or indeed from almost any period before the modern era. The explanation for this effect, discovered only when researchers examined fragments of the glass under an electron microscope during the 20th century, turned out to involve nanotechnology in the fullest modern sense of that term, embedded directly within 4th century Roman glass. The cups makers had incorporated microscopic particles of gold and silver, ground down to an almost unimaginably small size, somewhere in the range of 50 nanometers in diameter, roughly 1,000 times smaller than a single grain of ordinary table salt, distributed throughout the glass during its manufacture. At this incredibly tiny scale, gold and silver particles interact with light in a fundamentally different way than they do at any larger, visible scale. A phenomenon modern physicists refer to as surface plasmon resonance, causing the particles to absorb and scatter different wavelengths of light, depending on whether that light is being reflected off the surface or transmitted directly through the material. There is no surviving evidence to suggest that Roman glassmakers understood the underlying physics of what they were actually doing when they created this effect, and it appears highly unlikely that a 4th century craftsman possessed any concept of atomic or subatomic particle behavior in anything resembling the way modern science understands it today. Researchers confirming this explanation went on to successfully recreate the same color-shifting effect in a modern laboratory setting, deliberately embedding similarly sized gold and silver nanoparticles into a fresh batch of molten glass, and found that their reproduction displayed the very same shift between green and red depending on the direction of illumination, effectively confirming that the physical mechanism responsible for the ancient cup's appearance had been correctly identified, even though the actual craftsman who created the original object nearly 17 centuries earlier could not possibly have understood why their specific technique produced the result that it did. What seems far more plausible is that this particular technique developed through an extended, painstaking process of experimentation and refinement, likely across multiple generations of glassmakers working within a specific, highly specialized workshop tradition, gradually discovering through repeated trial and error that adding extremely finely ground precious metal particles to molten glass under very specific conditions produced this genuinely dramatic visual effect, without ever fully grasping why it actually worked at the atomic level. The Lycurgus cup remains the only complete surviving example of this particular dichroic glass technique from the entire Roman period, suggesting that whatever knowledge and skill produced, it may have been confined to an extremely small number of workshops, or perhaps even a single master craftsman whose specific methods were never widely shared or were simply lost entirely once that particular workshop tradition came to an end. If Roman glassmakers could unknowingly manipulate matter at the nanoscale, it should come as no surprise that the very steel we discussed earlier in this list, the legendary Wootz steel of India, was itself built on a foundation of equally advanced, equally misunderstood metallurgical science. Number 21. Wootz steel of India. Long before European crusaders ever encountered the rippled, water-patterned blades they would come to know as Damascus steel, the raw material behind those weapons was already being produced in the furnaces of southern India, in a tradition stretching back as far as the 6th century BCE and continuing for well over 2,000 years afterward. Known as Wootz steel, this material was produced using a crucible smelting process, in which iron ore, along with carefully measured pieces of carbon-rich material such as charcoal or specific types of wood and leaves, was sealed inside a small clay crucible and heated to an extremely high temperature within a specially designed furnace, allowing the iron to fully melt into a liquid state, something most other ironworking traditions of the ancient world, working with lower temperature bloomery furnaces, simply could not achieve. This complete melting process allowed carbon to distribute itself evenly throughout the molten iron, producing a genuinely high-carbon steel with a remarkably consistent composition, considerably purer and more uniform than the iron produced by most contemporary smelting traditions elsewhere in the ancient world. As the crucible slowly cooled after the smelting process was complete, the carbon within the steel gradually formed itself into microscopic bands of a hard iron carbide compound alongside softer, more flexible iron, creating the material's characteristic layered internal structure, one that would later produce the famous rippling surface pattern seen on finished Damascus blades once the ingot was forged, folded, and worked by a skilled swordsmith into its final shape. Producing Wootz steel successfully required an extraordinary degree of precise control over both temperature and cooling rate, control that Indian metalworkers achieved without any thermometer or other instrument capable of measuring heat directly, relying instead entirely on visual cues, the specific color of the glowing crucible, and an intimate, deeply practiced understanding of exactly how long each stage of the process needed to continue before moving to the next. Modern chemical analysis of surviving Wootz ingots and finished blades has identified trace quantities of elements, including vanadium and molybdenum within the metal, elements that appear to have originated from specific regional iron ore deposits in southern India, and whose particular presence in just the right minute quantities appears to have played a genuine role in encouraging the formation of the carbide bands responsible for the material's famous properties, meaning the very geology of a specific patch of Indian countryside contributed just as directly to the finished steel's legendary quality as the skill of the smiths who worked it. This Wootz steel was traded extensively along established trade routes, stretching from India westward through Persia and onward into the Middle East, forming the essential raw material that Damascus smiths would later work into their legendary blades, and quite possibly also reaching Viking territory as one plausible source of the exceptionally high-quality steel found within the genuine Ulfbert swords discussed earlier in this list. The production of true Wootz steel eventually declined and largely disappeared sometime around the 18th or 19th century, likely due to a combination of depleted regional ore deposits containing the specific trace elements needed for the process, along with the gradual displacement of traditional crucible steel production by newer industrial steelmaking methods introduced during the colonial period, bringing to an end a continuous metallurgical tradition that had quietly supplied some of the finest steel in the ancient and medieval world for well over 2,000 years. Having traced steel back to its Indian origins, we turn now to an entirely different kind of ancient craftsmanship, one focused not on weapons of war, but on repairing and preserving the human body itself, using surgical techniques recorded on a papyrus scroll that predates the birth of Hippocrates by well over 1,000 years. Number 20. The Edwin Smith Surgical Papyrus. Purchased in Egypt during the 19th century by an American dealer named Edwin Smith, and eventually translated and studied in detail during the 20th century, an ancient Egyptian medical document now bearing his name has been dated by scholars to approximately 1600 BCE, though its content appears to be a copy of a considerably older original text, likely composed sometime around 3000 BCE, making its underlying medical knowledge extraordinarily ancient, even by the standards of ancient Egyptian civilization itself. Unlike most other surviving Egyptian medical papyri, which focus heavily on magical incantations and religious remedies for illness, the Edwin Smith Papyrus reads in a strikingly clinical, methodical, almost modern tone, describing a structured approach to diagnosing and treating traumatic injuries, particularly injuries to the head, neck, and spine, likely compiled originally as a practical reference text for physicians treating wounded soldiers or labourers. The document describes 48 separate medical cases, each following a consistent structure: a description of the injury, an examination of the patient, a diagnosis categorized according to the likelihood of recovery, and, where appropriate, a recommended course of treatment. Each case was sorted by the ancient physician into one of three clear prognostic categories, translated by modern scholars roughly as an ailment that can be treated, an ailment that can be contended with, and an ailment that cannot be treated. A genuinely systematic triage framework that allowed a physician to quickly communicate a realistic outlook to a patient or their family, and that closely mirrors the basic logic behind triage systems still used in emergency medicine today, sorting patients according to the realistic likelihood that treatment will actually help them. What genuinely startled modern researchers studying the text was the presence of several cases where the ancient physician correctly recognized that a particular injury was untreatable given the medical knowledge and tools available at the time, honestly noting this fact rather than offering a remedy that would have had no real chance of helping the patient. A level of clinical honesty and realistic prognosis that reflects a surprisingly sophisticated, empirically grounded approach to medicine for a document this old. The papyrus also contains what is generally considered the earliest known description of the human brain's surface anatomy, describing the corrugated, wrinkled appearance of brain tissue exposed through a skull injury, along with an early recognition that damage to one side of the brain could produce physical symptoms on the opposite side of the body, a genuinely advanced neurological observation that would not be properly explained by Western medical science again for many centuries afterward. Treatments described within the papyrus include the use of raw meat applied to fresh wounds, likely functioning as an early antimicrobial measure, given that the process of applying it would have helped keep the wound clean of certain contaminants, along with the use of honey, which modern science has confirmed possesses genuine antibacterial properties, and the practical use of sutures and splints to stabilize serious injuries, techniques that align closely with sound medical practice even by more modern standards. The document also describes what appears to be an early form of surgical closure using adhesive strips and cautious recommendations against certain treatments in specific situations where the ancient physician evidently recognized, likely through accumulated practical experience treating similar cases over time, that a particular intervention was more likely to cause harm than benefit. Reading this document today offers a genuinely humbling reminder that careful, honest clinical observation, built up gradually through repeated practical experience, treating real patients, can produce startlingly sound medical knowledge even in the complete absence of germ theory, modern anatomy, or any of the scientific infrastructure we now consider essential to the practice of medicine. Ancient Egyptian expertise extended well beyond treating the living, however, into an equally sophisticated body of chemical knowledge focused on preserving the dead for what its practitioners believed would be an eternal afterlife. Number 19. Egyptian mummification chemistry. Ancient Egyptian embalmers, working over a tradition that stretched across roughly 3,000 years, developed a remarkably effective, chemically sophisticated process for preserving human remains, one that modern forensic scientists and conservators continue to study closely even today, since the mummies produced by the most skilled Egyptian practitioners have survived in recognizable, well-preserved condition for well over 3,000 years, a level of long-term biological preservation that remains genuinely difficult to match using many modern methods, particularly without the benefit of refrigeration or modern chemical preservatives. The mummification process itself involved removing the body's internal organs, which decompose fastest after death, with the notable exception of the heart, which Egyptian religious belief held would be needed and weighed against a feather during judgment in the afterlife. The brain, considered by Egyptian physicians to serve little practical function, was typically removed through the nostril using a specialized hooked instrument, and the emptied body cavity was then thoroughly dried using natron, a naturally occurring mixture of salts, primarily sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate, harvested from dry lake beds within Egypt itself. This natron drew moisture out of the tissue over a process lasting approximately 40 days, since bacteria responsible for decomposition require a certain level of moisture to survive and multiply, effectively halting the decay process by creating an environment simply too dry for those bacteria to continue functioning. Once fully dried, the body was treated with a range of resins, oils, and other substances, including tree resins that possess genuine natural antimicrobial properties, along with beeswax and various plant-based oils used to help keep the preserved skin from becoming excessively brittle, before finally being wrapped in many layers of linen bandages, often with protective amulets tucked between individual layers according to specific religious practices intended to protect the deceased during their journey through the afterlife. Modern chemical analysis of well-preserved mummies and the residue found within their wrappings has identified specific plant resins, some sourced from trees not native to Egypt itself, indicating that Egyptian embalmers maintained trade relationships reaching considerable distances specifically to acquire the particular preservative materials their craft required. Non-invasive computed tomography scanning conducted on well-preserved royal mummies in recent decades, allowing researchers to examine the interior of a wrapped body without ever needing to unwrap or damage the fragile linen bandages themselves, has revealed the sheer consistency and skill with which the very best embalmers carried out their work, showing individually wrapped fingers and toes, carefully packed linen or resin-soaked material used to restore a lifelike shape to a body that had lost significant volume during the drying process, and in some cases artificial eyes made from stone or linen padding inserted beneath the closed eyelids specifically to help preserve a more natural facial appearance for the deceased. The overall effectiveness of this process depended on a genuinely sophisticated, if empirically rather than scientifically derived, understanding of which specific combination of drying agents, antimicrobial resins, and protective wrapping techniques would together prevent the kind of bacterial and fungal decomposition that would otherwise destroy a body within a matter of weeks, refined and passed down across dozens of generations of specialized embalming priests who guarded much of their specific technique as closely held professional and religious knowledge. From preserving the dead, we move now to a device built to warn the living, an instrument invented in ancient China that could reportedly detect an earthquake happening hundreds of miles away, long before anyone even had a name for the concept of seismic waves. Number 18. Zhang Heng's seismoscope. In the year 132 CE, a Chinese polymath and court astronomer named Zhang Heng presented an invention to the Han Dynasty imperial court that, according to surviving historical records, was capable of detecting the direction of a distant earthquake even when nobody in the capital city had felt any tremor at all. The device, described in later historical texts, though no original example has survived to the present day, consisted of a large bronze vessel, roughly the size of a wine jar, decorated around its outer circumference with 8 dragon heads, each holding a small bronze ball in its mouth, positioned above 8 corresponding bronze toads arranged below them around the base of the vessel. According to the historical account, when an earthquake occurred, even one far too distant or too weak to be felt directly by anyone in the capital, a mechanism inside the sealed bronze vessel would detect the resulting ground vibration and cause exactly one of the 8 dragon heads to release its ball, which would then fall directly into the open mouth of the toad positioned below it, producing an audible sound and indicating the general geographic direction from which the seismic disturbance had originated. The most famous recorded demonstration of the device describes a moment when one of the balls dropped, despite no tremor having been felt anywhere in the capital, leading some court officials to dismiss the instrument as unreliable, only for a messenger to arrive several days later, reporting that a significant earthquake had indeed struck a region located precisely in the direction the fallen ball had indicated, a considerable distance away. Modern researchers and engineers, working from the surviving textual descriptions of the device rather than any physical original, have proposed several possible internal mechanisms that could plausibly have produced this effect, generally involving some form of pendulum or inverted pendulum suspended within the sealed vessel, connected through a lever system to the mechanism holding each dragon's ball in place, such that ground vibrations travelling through the device's base would cause the pendulum to shift slightly toward the direction the seismic waves were travelling from, triggering the release mechanism on the corresponding dragon head while leaving the other 7 undisturbed. Zhang Heng himself was a genuinely remarkable figure within the Han Dynasty court beyond this single invention, also credited with producing an early water-powered armillary sphere used to model and track the movement of celestial bodies, along with detailed astronomical writings estimating the number of visible stars in the sky and describing the moon's light as a reflection of sunlight rather than a light source in its own right. A genuinely advanced astronomical insight for the 2nd century CE. Several modern reconstructions built according to this general principle have demonstrated at least a basic ability to detect simulated ground vibrations and indicate a general directional origin, lending real credibility to the idea that Zhang Heng's device, even without any concept of modern seismology or wave physics behind its design, represented a genuinely functional instrument capable of detecting and providing directional information about distant earthquakes, a scientific capability that would not be reliably reproduced anywhere else in the world for roughly 1,700 years. From an instrument built to sense the Earth's hidden movements, we turn now to devices built to move and act entirely on their own, mechanical marvels constructed in ancient Alexandria that blurred the line between simple machinery and something that must have felt to anyone watching them operate remarkably close to magic. Number 17. Hero of Alexandria's steam engine and automata. Working in the Egyptian city of Alexandria, sometime around the 1st century CE, a Greek mathematician and engineer named Hero, sometimes rendered as Heron, produced a series of written works describing an extraordinary range of mechanical devices, several of which anticipated core engineering principles that would not become practically significant again for many centuries afterward. Among the most famous of these described devices is the Aeolipile, a hollow metal sphere mounted on a pivot above a water-filled container, with 2 bent tubes extending from opposite sides of the sphere. When the water below was heated, the resulting steam travelled up into the sphere and escaped through the 2 angled tubes, and the reaction force of the escaping steam caused the entire sphere to spin rapidly on its pivot, representing what is generally recognised as the earliest known practical demonstration of a functioning steam-powered rotational device, built well over 1,500 years before steam power would become the driving force behind the Industrial Revolution. Hero's surviving writings also describe an impressive range of automated mechanical devices, including automatic temple doors that would appear to open on their own whenever a fire was lit on an altar positioned in front of them, a mechanism that actually worked through the expansion of heated air, pushing water through a hidden system of pipes and containers, which in turn operated a counterweight system connected to the door hinges. Devices of this kind were installed in actual temples during antiquity rather than existing purely as theoretical writings, and ancient visitors witnessing a set of heavy temple doors swing open on their own the moment a priest lit a sacrificial fire would have experienced something that must have felt genuinely miraculous, reinforcing a sense of divine presence and approval at exactly the moment the priesthood most wanted worshippers to feel it, a practical, deliberate use of mechanical engineering in service of religious theatre. He also described a mechanical coin-operated device designed to dispense a fixed measured quantity of holy water whenever a coin of the correct weight was dropped into a slot, functioning through a straightforward but genuinely clever lever and counterweight mechanism, representing what is often cited as the earliest known example of a vending machine of any kind, built roughly 2,000 years before the concept became commonplace in everyday life. Perhaps most theatrically, Hero also designed elaborate automated puppet theatres, driven by an intricate system of weights, cords, and rotating cylinders, with pegs positioned to trigger specific movements at precisely timed intervals, capable of performing short mechanical plays lasting several minutes entirely without any human operator directly controlling the individual movements once the performance had begun. None of Hero's devices were ever developed into practical, large-scale sources of mechanical power in his own era, largely because ancient Alexandria possessed an economy built substantially around slave labor, removing much of the economic incentive that would later drive the industrial world to seriously invest in and refine steam power as a genuine replacement for human and animal labor. Hero's true significance lies less in any single invention and more in demonstrating, through an entire body of surviving written work, that the ancient world possessed a genuinely sophisticated theoretical understanding of pressure, heated air, and steam expansion, and mechanical leverage, all of it developed and recorded many centuries before the practical, world-changing applications of those same basic principles would finally arrive. Hero's steam-powered curiosities were remarkable, but he was far from the only Alexandrian engineer building devices that seemed to bend the ordinary rules of time and motion, since another inventor working in that very same intellectual tradition had already found a way to make water itself keep track of the passing hours with startling precision. Number 16. The water clocks of Ctesibius. Working in Alexandria, sometime during the 3rd century BCE, an engineer and inventor named Ctesibius, generally credited as one of the founding figures of the broader Alexandrian school of mechanical engineering that would later include Hero, developed a genuinely sophisticated water clock known by the Greek term klepsydra, capable of measuring time with a level of consistency and precision that far exceeded the simpler water clocks already in use across the ancient Mediterranean world for many centuries beforehand. Earlier water clocks, used across Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece, typically worked on a fairly basic principle, measuring time according to the rate at which water dripped or drained from one container into another, a system that suffered from an inherent and fairly serious flaw, since the rate of flow naturally changes depending on how much water remains in the upper container, meaning that a container full of water empties considerably faster than the very same container when it is nearly empty. Ctesibius solved this fundamental problem through a genuinely elegant engineering solution, incorporating a secondary reservoir designed to maintain a perfectly constant water level within the primary measuring vessel, regardless of how much water remained in the overall system, ensuring that water flowed out of the timing mechanism at a truly steady, unchanging rate throughout the entire duration of its operation. His most advanced clocks used this steady flow of water to raise a float, which in turn slowly rotated a marked cylinder or dial, allowing the passage of time to be read visually in a manner that would have felt genuinely familiar to anyone accustomed to reading an analog clock face today. Some of his more elaborate versions incorporated additional moving figures, whistles, and even small mechanical birds, driven by the same underlying water-powered mechanism, adding a layer of decorative mechanical performance on top of the clock's basic timekeeping function. Ctesibius's water clocks were sophisticated enough that later Roman engineers continued using and refining designs based on his original principles for several centuries afterward, and Roman public buildings, particularly courts of law, are known to have used water clocks descended from this same basic Alexandrian design, specifically to regulate and limit the length of time allotted to lawyers and litigants during formal legal proceedings, a genuinely practical application of precise timekeeping technology that connects surprisingly directly to modern courtroom procedures involving strictly timed arguments. This same basic Alexandrian tradition of self-regulating water clocks continued to be studied, translated, and further developed by scholars working across the medieval Islamic world many centuries later, who built on these Hellenistic foundations to construct increasingly elaborate water-powered clocks, incorporating automated figures, striking mechanisms, and astronomical displays, extending a continuous engineering lineage that traces directly back to Ctesibius's original innovations in 3rd century BCE Alexandria. What makes Ctesibius's achievement particularly significant is not any single component of his design in isolation, since each individual element, floats, siphons, gears, had existed in some simpler form before his time, but rather his genuinely innovative combination of these elements into a single, reliable, self-regulating system, a design philosophy that anticipates core principles of feedback and mechanical regulation that would not become fully formalized within engineering theory until many centuries later. From clocks powered by carefully regulated water, we now travel north to a very different kind of Alexandrian-level ingenuity, one developed not in a workshop but out on the open, featureless ocean, where Viking sailors needed a way to navigate accurately even when thick cloud cover hid the sun completely from view. Number 15. Viking sunstones. Medieval Icelandic sagas make repeated reference to a mysterious navigational tool called a sunstone, described as being used by Norse sailors to locate the position of the sun in the sky, even under conditions of heavy overcast cloud cover or persistent fog, circumstances under which ordinary visual navigation by sighting the sun directly would have been completely impossible. For a long time, this reference was treated by many historians as likely referring to a simple, largely symbolic or ceremonial object, since no clear physical evidence of such a device had ever been recovered from any Viking-era archaeological site, and the underlying scientific principle that would allow such a stone to actually function as described was not immediately obvious. Modern research into the optical properties of certain naturally occurring crystals, particularly Iceland spar, a clear, naturally birefringent form of the mineral calcite readily available within Iceland itself, has demonstrated that this specific type of crystal possesses a genuinely useful property. It splits incoming light into two separate polarized beams, and the relative brightness of these two beams changes in a very specific, predictable way depending on the polarization angle of the sunlight passing through it. Because sunlight scattered through Earth's atmosphere becomes polarized in a distinct pattern relative to the sun's actual position, even when the sun itself is completely hidden behind thick cloud cover. Holding a properly cut piece of Iceland spar up to the sky and rotating it while observing the changing brightness of the two resulting light beams can, in principle, allow a sufficiently practiced user to determine the sun's general position in the sky with a genuinely useful degree of accuracy, even under conditions where direct visual sighting would be entirely impossible. The strongest piece of physical evidence supporting this theory arrived when archaeologists recovered a fragment of Iceland spar from the wreck of a 16th century English ship, considerably later than the Viking era itself, but still well before the invention of any reliable magnetic compass suitable for accurate maritime use, found stored alongside navigational instruments in a context strongly suggesting it had been used deliberately as a practical aid to navigation rather than simply carried as a curiosity or decorative object. It is worth noting that even after the magnetic compass eventually reached Europe, it offered a genuinely limited advantage at the high northern latitudes Viking sailors regularly travelled through, since the difference between magnetic north and true geographic north grows considerably more pronounced the further north a ship travels, meaning a sunstone capable of directly identifying the actual position of the sun could, in certain respects, have offered more immediately useful and more easily verified directional information for a North Atlantic voyage than an early magnetic compass would have provided. Modern experimental tests conducted by researchers using similarly prepared crystals under genuinely overcast Nordic sky conditions have demonstrated that a practiced user can indeed determine the sun's approximate position with a useful degree of accuracy using this exact method, lending real, if not entirely conclusive, scientific support to the old saga descriptions. For Viking sailors making long, exposed open ocean crossings toward Iceland, Greenland, and eventually the coast of North America, often under the persistently overcast skies typical of the North Atlantic, a reliable method for locating the sun's position even through heavy cloud cover, would have represented a genuinely significant navigational advantage, one that may help explain how these sailors managed to complete such long and often successful ocean voyages long before the widespread adoption of the magnetic compass in Europe. Speaking of the compass, our next entry takes us to ancient China, where an entirely different civilization was independently discovering the very same magnetic principle and building an extraordinary mechanical device around it that had absolutely nothing to do with magnetism at all. Number 14. The Chinese compass and south-pointing chariot. Chinese scholars during the Han Dynasty, sometime around the 1st century BCE, recorded early observations of a naturally magnetic mineral known as lodestone, noting its tendency to align itself consistently in a particular north-south direction when allowed to move or rotate freely, an observation that would eventually develop across the following several centuries into the practical magnetic compass, initially used primarily for geomantic and divinatory purposes connected to the traditional Chinese practice of feng shui, well before it became widely adopted as a genuinely practical maritime and overland navigational tool sometime around the 11th century CE. Running alongside this genuine magnetic discovery, however, ancient Chinese texts also describe an entirely separate device known as the south-pointing chariot, a small wheeled vehicle topped with a rotating figure whose outstretched arm was said to continuously point south, regardless of whichever direction the chariot itself happened to be turning as it moved across the ground. Crucially, and in a detail that continues to genuinely surprise people, encountering this story for the first time, the south-pointing chariot had absolutely nothing to do with magnetism whatsoever, functioning instead through a purely mechanical differential gear system connected directly to the chariot's wheels that used the difference in rotation speed between the vehicle's left and right wheels whenever it turned to automatically counter-rotate the figure mounted on top by exactly the same angular amount, keeping its pointing arm consistently oriented in a single fixed direction no matter which way the cart itself happened to be steered. This represents a genuinely early and remarkably sophisticated practical application of differential gearing, a mechanical principle that would later become fundamentally important to automobile design many centuries afterward, allowing a vehicle's wheels to rotate at different speeds relative to one another during a turn without causing excessive tire wear or mechanical strain. Though the ancient Chinese engineers who built the south-pointing chariot were applying this same underlying mechanical concept toward an entirely different practical purpose. Historical records describe the device being used practically as a navigational aid on featureless terrain, particularly the open grasslands and plains of northern China, where reliable landmarks were often scarce, and later Chinese engineers across several subsequent centuries are recorded as having successfully rebuilt working versions of the device, suggesting the underlying mechanical principle was genuinely understood and passed down, at least intermittently, across multiple dynasties rather than representing a single unrepeated invention. Historical records attribute early versions of the device to legendary or semi-legendary figures, reaching as far back as the 3rd millennium BCE, though the earliest reasonably reliable historical accounts of a working device date to considerably later, generally placed sometime around the 3rd century CE, during a period of Chinese history marked by intense competition and genuine innovation in mechanical and military engineering between several rival kingdoms. Whether used for military reconnaissance, ceremonial court display, or simply as an impressive demonstration of engineering skill, the south-pointing chariot stands as a genuinely striking example of two entirely different technological paths, one built on the natural properties of magnetized stone and the other on pure, carefully calculated mechanical gearing, both independently arriving at the exact same practical navigational goal within the very same ancient civilization. From gears that track direction without any magnetism at all, we turn now to a small clay tablet from ancient Mesopotamia that appears to demonstrate an understanding of mathematics so advanced that some researchers believe it predates the Greek discoveries, typically credited with founding the entire field of trigonometry. Number 13. Plimpton 322. Recovered sometime in the early 20th century and eventually acquired by the publisher and antiquities collector George Arthur Plimpton, whose eventual donation to Columbia University gave the tablet its modern catalogue name. This small clay tablet, inscribed in cuneiform script and generally dated to somewhere around 1800 BCE during the Old Babylonian period, contains a table of numbers arranged into 4 columns and 15 rows, written using the base 60 numerical system that Babylonian mathematicians and astronomers relied upon for their calculations. For a considerable time after its initial translation, the tablet's exact mathematical purpose remained a subject of genuine scholarly disagreement, with early researchers proposing that it might represent a simple trigonometric table, a teaching aid for students, or a list of numbers connected to a completely different administrative or commercial purpose, entirely unrelated to advanced mathematics. More recent mathematical analysis, conducted by researchers examining the specific numerical relationships embedded within the tablet's 4 columns, has demonstrated that the numbers recorded on Plimpton 322 correspond precisely to what are known as Pythagorean triples, sets of 3 whole numbers that satisfy the same basic geometric relationship later formalized in the West as the Pythagorean theorem, describing the relationship between the 3 sides of a right-angled triangle. What makes this particular discovery genuinely remarkable is that the specific triples recorded on the tablet were generated using a method that, according to several researchers who have studied the underlying mathematics closely, effectively functions as an early form of trigonometric table, allowing Babylonian scribes to look up precise ratios corresponding to different angles without relying on the kind of circular, angle-based trigonometric functions that Greek mathematicians would develop many centuries later using an entirely different theoretical approach based on measuring angles around a circle. Some researchers championing this interpretation have further suggested that a table constructed this way would actually have offered certain practical calculation advantages over the angle-based trigonometry that later became standard, since it relies purely on exact ratios between whole numbers rather than the kind of approximated decimal values that circular trigonometric functions typically require, potentially making it genuinely useful for the kind of precise land surveying, canal engineering, and monumental construction projects that Babylonian scribes are independently known to have been heavily involved in managing. If this particular interpretation of the tablet's purpose is correct, and it remains a topic of genuine ongoing academic debate rather than fully settled scholarly consensus, it would place the origins of at least some practical trigonometric methods more than 1,000 years earlier than the traditionally credited Greek astronomer Hipparchus, and would suggest that Babylonian mathematicians had developed a genuinely different ratio-based approach to solving the same fundamental class of geometric problems that Greek trigonometry would later approach through angles and circles instead. Regardless of exactly how the tablet was originally used in its own time, whether as a practical working reference table for scribes engaged in surveying, architecture, or astronomical calculation, or as a teaching tool demonstrating advanced mathematical relationships to trainee scribes, Plimpton 322 stands as clear physical evidence that Babylonian mathematicians nearly 4,000 years ago possessed a level of sophisticated numerical understanding regarding right-angled triangles that would not be formally matched using a comparably systematic approach by the civilizations of the ancient Mediterranean world for well over a millennium afterward. From a clay tablet covered in advanced mathematics, we turn now to a small disc of baked clay from the island of Crete, stamped with symbols using a method that some researchers believe may represent the world's very first known example of movable type printing, over 3,000 years before Johannes Gutenberg was ever born. Number 12. The Phaistos Disc. Discovered in 1908 by an Italian archaeologist excavating the ruins of the Minoan palace complex at Phaistos on the island of Crete, a small, roughly circular disc of fired clay, measuring only about 6 inches across, bears a spiral sequence of stamped symbols pressed into its soft clay surface before it was fired, covering both sides in a continuous, unbroken spiral running from the disc's outer edge inward toward its center. Dated by most archaeologists to somewhere around 1700 BCE, based largely on the archaeological layer in which it was found, the disc contains a total of 241 individual symbol impressions, made up of 45 distinct symbol types depicting recognizable images including human figures, various plants, animals, and a number of geometric shapes and tools. What makes the Phaistos disc so genuinely unusual, setting it apart from virtually every other surviving example of ancient writing, is the method used to create it. Rather than being carved, scratched, or painted directly onto the clay surface by hand, as was standard practice for essentially all other ancient inscriptions from this general period, each individual symbol on the disc appears to have been stamped into the soft clay using a separate individually carved seal or stamp for each specific symbol type, meaning that whoever created the disc possessed a complete set of 45 reusable stamps, each representing one distinct symbol, and used them repeatedly and in different combinations to produce the finished text, a production method that bears a genuinely striking conceptual resemblance to movable type printing over 3,000 years before Johannes Gutenberg's printing press would revolutionize written communication across Europe. Despite more than a century of dedicated scholarly effort, the text of the Phaistos disc has never been successfully deciphered, and no other artifact bearing the same symbol system has ever been discovered anywhere else in the archaeological record, leaving researchers with no comparative reference material of any kind to help translate its meaning. A genuinely unusual situation for ancient writing, since most undeciphered scripts at least exist in multiple examples that can be cross-referenced against one another to help identify recurring patterns or probable word boundaries. Some linguists studying the disc have noted small marks separating certain groups of symbols along the spiral, generally interpreted as word or phrase dividers, and have used the resulting groupings to attempt basic statistical analysis of how frequently particular symbols and symbol combinations recur throughout the text, an approach that has produced interesting patterns without ever coming close to a confident, generally accepted translation of the actual underlying language. Numerous theories regarding the disc's purpose and meaning have been proposed over the past century, ranging from a religious hymn or prayer, to an administrative record, to a board game, to, more controversially, and with considerably less scholarly support, an outright modern forgery, though the specific manufacturing technique used to create the disc, involving multiple individually carved stamps pressed with the level of consistency actually observed on the surviving artifact, would have been genuinely difficult for anyone to fake convincingly using the archaeological knowledge available at the time of its discovery in 1908. Whatever its actual purpose and whatever secrets its unique spiral of stamped symbols may still contain, the Phaistos disc remains a genuinely singular artifact, a solitary and stubbornly silent example of an entire, apparently reusable printing technology that seemingly appeared once in the ancient world and then vanished just as completely, leaving behind no successors and no clear explanation. From one of history's most enduring mysteries, we move to something considerably more physically massive and considerably better understood, though no less impressive. An entire network of roads and water systems that kept the largest empire the ancient Mediterranean world had ever seen running smoothly for centuries. Number 11. Roman roads and aqueduct engineering. At the height of its territorial extent, The Roman Empire maintained an interconnected road network stretching across an estimated 50,000 miles of paved primary roadway, supplemented by many additional thousands of miles of smaller secondary roads, connecting cities, military outposts, and administrative centres across a territory spanning from the northern reaches of Britain all the way to the deserts of the Middle East and North Africa. These roads were built using a genuinely sophisticated layered construction technique, typically beginning with a foundation of large, compacted stones, followed by a middle layer of smaller stones and gravel mixed with lime mortar, and finally topped with closely fitted, carefully cut paving stones, with the entire road surface built with a slight upward curve at the centre, specifically designed to allow rainwater to drain naturally off to the sides, rather than pooling and gradually eroding the road surface itself. This careful attention to drainage and foundation depth meant that Roman roads were built to last considerably longer and to remain usable in a far wider range of weather conditions than many roads built across Europe during the many centuries that followed the empire's eventual collapse. And remarkably, sections of original Roman road surface, along with the raised engineered roadbed beneath them, remain visible and in some cases still walkable today across various parts of Europe, nearly 2,000 years after their original construction. The network's overall design also reflected a genuinely strategic military and administrative logic, with roads generally built as directly as terrain reasonably allowed between major cities, supplemented by a system of regularly spaced way stations, providing fresh horses, food, and lodging specifically intended to allow official messengers and military units to move across enormous distances with a speed and reliability that would not be matched again in much of Europe until many centuries later. Roman aqueducts represented an equally impressive feat of civil engineering, relying entirely on the natural force of gravity to transport enormous quantities of fresh water, sometimes across distances exceeding 50 miles from mountain springs and rivers all the way into major cities, using a network of channels maintained at an extraordinarily precise and gradual downward gradient, often no steeper than roughly 1 inch of vertical drop for every few hundred feet of horizontal distance travelled, a level of surveying precision that had to be achieved using comparatively simple instruments, without any of the laser levels or satellite positioning technology available to modern civil engineers. Roman surveyors accomplished this remarkable feat primarily using a device known as the chorobates, a long wooden bench fitted with a built-in water-filled channel that functioned as a simple but effective level, along with another instrument called the groma, used to establish straight lines and right angles across the landscape. Tools that demanded genuine skill and patience to use accurately, but that nonetheless allowed Roman engineers to plan and construct water channels stretching for dozens of miles while maintaining the extremely narrow gradient tolerances their aqueducts required to function correctly. Where the terrain required aqueduct channels to cross valleys or lower lying ground, Roman engineers built elevated stone arch structures, some reaching heights of over 150 feet, to maintain the water channel's necessary consistent gradient throughout. Structures whose surviving remains, such as the Pont du Gard in southern France, continue to stand largely intact today, testifying to a level of structural engineering skill applied at genuinely massive scale that allowed Roman cities to support public baths, elaborate fountains, and private household water supplies for their populations on a scale that many European cities would not manage to reproduce again until several centuries into the modern era. Having connected an empire with roads and water, we now travel across the Atlantic to an entirely different civilization, one that managed to run an equally vast administrative empire without ever developing a written alphabet at all, relying instead on an intricate system of knotted cords that modern researchers are only now beginning to properly understand. Number 10. Inca Quipu. The Inca Empire which at its height during the 15th and early 16th centuries controlled a territory stretching along an enormous portion of the western coast of South America, administered an enormously complex state encompassing millions of subjects, an extensive road network, elaborate agricultural terracing systems, and a highly organized system of taxation and labor obligation, without ever developing any conventional system of written language in the way that societies in Mesopotamia, Egypt, or China had. Managing an empire of this scale and complexity, spanning wildly different climates and terrains from coastal desert to high Andean plateau to dense eastern jungle, required an administrative record-keeping system capable of tracking an enormous volume of information across vast distances, a challenge that most other comparably sized ancient states addressed through some form of writing, making the Inca solution genuinely unusual among large pre-modern empires. Instead, Inca administrators relied on an ingenious recording system known as the quipu, consisting of a primary horizontal cord from which numerous secondary cords hung down, each one tied with a specific sequence of knots positioned at carefully varied points along its length. The specific type, position, and grouping of knots tied into each individual cord allowed quipu specialists, known as quipu kamayoks, to encode numerical information using a base 10 positional counting system, remarkably similar in its underlying logic to the decimal system used throughout much of the modern world today, capable of recording census data, tax obligations, military supply counts, and calendar-related information with a level of numerical precision and organizational complexity that Spanish colonial administrators, upon first encountering the system following their conquest of the Inca Empire in the 1530s, were genuinely astonished to discover, since many had initially assumed a society lacking conventional writing would necessarily also lack any sophisticated method of record keeping. Beyond their well-documented numerical function, a considerable body of historical and modern research suggests that at least some quipu, generally referred to by researchers as narrative quipu, may have encoded non-numerical information as well, potentially including historical records, genealogies, or even elements of storytelling, using variations in cord color, the specific type of fiber used, the direction in which individual cords were twisted, and the particular style of knot employed, though this particular narrative dimension of the system has proven considerably more difficult for modern researchers to decode than the comparatively more straightforward numerical quipu, since the specific symbolic meaning attached to different colors, materials, and knotting styles was never written down in any conventional sense and had to be learned directly through years of specialized training under an experienced quipu kamayok. Quipu were carried across the empire's extensive road network by relay runners known as chasqui, stationed at regularly spaced posts along Inca roads, specifically to carry messages, including quipu records, at genuinely impressive speed between the capital and its distant provinces, allowing information to travel across the length of an empire that stretched for thousands of miles along the Andes considerably faster than comparable messages could typically move across many other pre-modern societies of similar territorial scale. Following the Spanish conquest, colonial authorities grew increasingly suspicious of the quipu system, partly due to a justified concern that it might be used to record information, including local resistance activity or details unfavorable to colonial administrators that Spanish officials themselves could not directly read or verify, leading to the deliberate destruction of a great many quipu over the following decades. A devastating loss that has left modern researchers working with only a comparatively small number of surviving examples, a few hundred in total, as they continue the ongoing effort to more fully understand exactly how much information and what specific kinds of information this remarkable knotted cord system was originally capable of recording. From a civilization that recorded its entire history in knotted string, we turn now to a small, mysterious bronze object found scattered in dozens of locations across the former territory of the Roman Empire, an object whose exact purpose has genuinely stumped historians and archaeologists for centuries. Number 9. The Roman dodecahedra. Since the 18th century, archaeologists working across various sites throughout the former territory of the Roman Empire concentrated particularly heavily in regions corresponding to modern France, Germany, Belgium, and the Netherlands, have recovered well over 100 small, hollow bronze objects shaped as regular dodecahedra, meaning each object possesses exactly 12 flat pentagonal faces, with each individual face containing a circular hole of a different diameter and small knobbed spheres attached to each of the shape's 20 vertices. Generally dated to somewhere between the 2nd and 4th centuries CEE, these objects range in size from roughly 4 to 11 centimeters across, and despite the considerable number of examples recovered across a genuinely wide geographic area, not a single ancient Roman text, inscription, or artistic depiction has ever been found that explicitly describes what these objects were actually used for. The objects have typically been recovered from a fairly wide variety of archaeological contexts, including buried coin hoards, the remains of domestic buildings, and what appear to be temple or shrine sites, rather than being consistently associated with any single, clearly identifiable type of location, a pattern that has made it considerably more difficult for researchers to narrow down the object's likely purpose using context alone, since a tool associated exclusively with religious sites, for example, would suggest a very different function than one found scattered casually among ordinary household items. This near-total absence of any explanatory textual or artistic evidence has led researchers to propose an unusually large number of competing theories over the years regarding the dodecahedra's intended function, ranging from candle holders, given that a candle placed inside could project light out through the various differently sized holes, to a specialized tool used by Roman surveyors or military engineers for measuring distances or calculating specific angles, to a device connected to religious or divinatory ceremonial practice, to, somewhat more whimsically, a specialized knitting tool used to produce gloves or other woven items requiring a consistent, evenly spaced set of finger-sized loops, a theory that gained considerable renewed popular attention after a modern craftsperson successfully demonstrated that the objects could indeed be used in exactly this manner to knit a reasonably well-fitted glove. The objects themselves were clearly produced using a genuine and fairly involved bronze casting process, and the noticeable variation in overall size and the specific diameter of the holes across different individual examples that have been recovered suggests they were not mass-produced according to any single standardized template, but were instead crafted somewhat individually, possibly by different workshops working from a shared general design concept rather than an identical universal blueprint. A number of the recovered examples have also been found alongside Roman coin hoards, suggesting to some researchers that the objects may have been valued as a genuine store of wealth in their own right, given the not insignificant quantity of bronze required to cast one, quite separate from whatever practical function, if any, they were originally designed to serve. Their consistent discovery specifically within the territory of the former Roman provinces of Gaul and Germania, combined with their near-complete absence from Italy itself and from the eastern regions of the empire, suggests the objects may have held some specific regional, cultural, religious, or practical significance, particular to Roman military and civilian communities living in these specific northwestern frontier provinces, rather than representing an item of universal, empire-wide use. Nearly 250 years after the very first example was formally documented and studied by antiquarians, the true purpose of the Roman dodecahedra remains genuinely unresolved, a rare case where we possess more than 100 physical examples of an ancient object, crafted with clear intention and real skill, and yet still cannot say with any real confidence exactly what its makers actually built it to do. From small bronze puzzles small enough to fit in the palm of a hand, we turn now to objects on the opposite end of the size spectrum entirely, the towering granite obelisks of ancient Egypt, each one carved from a single continuous block of solid stone and somehow transported without any wheeled vehicle strong enough to bear their weight across many miles of open desert. Number 8. Moving the obelisks. Ancient Egyptian craftsmen carved enormous single-piece stone obelisks, some reaching heights of over 100 feet and weighing several hundred tons, out of solid granite quarried primarily from a single site near the modern city of Aswan, before transporting these genuinely massive stone monuments considerable distances, often exceeding 100 miles, to their final destinations at temple complexes throughout Egypt, all without the benefit of iron tools, wheeled carts capable of bearing anything close to that kind of weight, or any source of mechanical power beyond human and animal muscle. The most direct physical evidence explaining exactly how this genuinely staggering engineering challenge was accomplished comes from an unfinished obelisk still lying partially carved directly within the Aswan quarry itself, abandoned mid-construction after a crack was discovered running through the stone, which has given modern archaeologists an invaluable, unprecedented look at the actual quarrying and carving techniques used, techniques that would otherwise remain entirely invisible in any completed, transported monument. The quarrying process itself involved teams of workers using handheld stone tools, particularly extremely hard dolerite hammerstones, to gradually pound and grind away the surrounding granite along the intended outline of the obelisk, a slow, physically punishing process requiring an enormous, carefully coordinated amount of skilled manual labour sustained over what must have been many months for a single monument of significant size. Once fully carved and freed from the surrounding bedrock, the finished obelisk needed to be transported to the Nile River, loaded onto specially constructed barges, and floated downstream to its final destination, a transportation process that modern experimental archaeology, along with careful analysis of ancient artistic depictions showing obelisks being moved on wooden sledges pulled by large coordinated teams of labourers, suggests was accomplished using wooden sledges dragged across a prepared surface, likely lubricated with water or wet mud specifically to reduce friction, an approach that ancient Egyptian artwork itself directly depicts being used for other comparably massive stone transportation projects during this same general period. The final and arguably most delicate stage of the entire process involved actually raising the completed obelisk from a horizontal position into its final upright standing position at the temple site, a genuinely complex engineering challenge given the immense weight and considerable height involved, most likely accomplished using an enormous earthen ramp built up against a prepared stone base combined with wooden levers, ropes, and large coordinated teams of workers gradually walking the monument upward along the ramp before finally levering and guiding it the last remaining distance into a perfectly vertical position, all performed without the assistance of any wheeled crane, pulley system employing modern mechanical advantage principles, or powered machinery of any kind. The unfinished obelisk still lying in the Aswan quarry, abandoned partway through the carving process once workers discovered a fatal crack running through the stone, would have stood roughly 137 feet tall and weighed well over 1,000 tons had it ever been completed, considerably larger than any Egyptian obelisk that was ever actually finished and successfully raised, offering modern researchers a genuinely rare window into just how ambitious these projects could become, and just how devastating a single unexpected flaw discovered deep within the stone could be, after months of painstaking, physically punishing labour had already been invested in a single monument. Modern engineers who have carefully studied this entire process generally agree that it would have required not simply an enormous amount of coordinated physical labour, but also genuinely careful mathematical planning regarding weight distribution, ramp angle, and the precise coordination of dozens or even hundreds of individual workers moving in careful, practiced unison, representing a monumental engineering achievement accomplished using nothing more than rope, wood, stone, water, and an extraordinarily well-organized human workforce. Having raised a single stone weighing hundreds of tons into the air, we now travel to the misty plains of southern England, to a monument built from stones transported an even more improbable distance, arranged with an acoustic and astronomical precision that continues to surprise researchers studying it today. Number 7. Stonehenge's acoustic engineering. Constructed in several distinct phases across a period stretching from roughly 3000 to 1500 BCE, the megalithic monument of Stonehenge, located on the Salisbury Plain in southern England, has long been studied primarily for its well-documented astronomical alignment, with the monument's main axis oriented to align directly with the position of the rising sun on the summer solstice and the setting sun on the winter solstice, an alignment achieved by its Neolithic builders using nothing more sophisticated than careful, sustained, long-term observation of the sun's changing position across the horizon throughout an entire annual cycle. In more recent years, however, researchers have turned increasing attention to an entirely different aspect of the monument's engineering, examining its potential acoustic properties, and the results have suggested that Stonehenge's builders may have understood considerably more about sound than anyone previously suspected. Acoustic modelling studies, including detailed research conducted using a precisely scaled physical replica of the monument built specifically to allow controlled acoustic testing that would be impossible to safely or ethically perform on the fragile original stones themselves, have demonstrated that the specific arrangement, spacing, and height of Stonehenge's massive sarsen stones would have created genuinely measurable acoustic effects within the enclosed circular space, including a noticeable degree of sound reflection and reverberation, capable of amplifying and sustaining sounds such as chanting, drumming, or ritual music produced by people standing within the central area of the monument. Achieving the monument's solstice alignment in the first place would have required its Neolithic builders to track the sun's rising and setting position along the horizon consistently across multiple full years, likely using fixed marker posts or stones set up specifically to record the sun's extreme positions at the height of summer and the depth of winter. A patient, multi-generational observational project requiring the kind of sustained institutional knowledge and continuity that suggests Stonehenge was built and refined by a settled community with the organisational capacity to plan and carry out a project spanning many decades rather than a single brief burst of construction activity. Some researchers have gone further, suggesting that the smaller bluestones incorporated into certain phases of the monument's construction, quarried from a specific site in the Preseli Hills of Wales, and transported an already remarkable distance of roughly 150 miles to reach Salisbury Plain, may have originally been selected partly for a documented acoustic property found in certain rocks from that same specific Welsh region, where some individual stones produce a genuinely distinctive ringing or bell-like tone when struck directly, a quality that local folklore in the surrounding area has associated with these particular rock formations for a very long time. Whether the acoustic properties of the monument represent a fully deliberate design consideration on the part of its Neolithic builders, or instead an incidental byproduct of a stone arrangement primarily intended to serve astronomical and ceremonial purposes, remains a genuinely open question that continues to generate active scholarly debate and ongoing research. What does seem considerably less disputed is that the monument's original builders undertook the transportation of the smaller bluestones across a genuinely extraordinary distance for a Neolithic society, working without any wheeled cart capable of bearing that kind of weight, or any draft animal larger than the cattle available in Britain during this period. a transportation challenge that some researchers believe may have been accomplished at least partially by water, floating the stones along a combination of coastal and river routes rather than relying purely on an entirely overland journey. Whatever combination of astronomical, acoustic, and ceremonial purposes ultimately motivated its construction, Stonehenge stands as clear evidence that a genuinely sophisticated understanding of the natural world, spanning astronomy, geology, and quite possibly acoustics as well, existed among prehistoric British communities working entirely without writing, metal tools, or the wheel. From a monument built to resonate with sound and sunlight, we travel now to the highlands of southern Africa, where an entirely different civilization built an enormous stone city using a construction technique so precise that its walls have stood for centuries without a single drop of mortar holding them together. Number 6. Great Zimbabwe's Dry Stone Walls. Built primarily between the 11th and 15th centuries CE by ancestors of the modern Shona people, the stone city complex now known as Great Zimbabwe, located in the highlands of what is today the southern African nation of Zimbabwe, represents one of the largest and most architecturally impressive pre-colonial stone constructions anywhere in sub-Saharan Africa. Its most famous surviving structure being an enormous curved stone enclosure known as the Great Enclosure, featuring walls reaching heights of over 30 feet and stretching across a circumference of roughly 250 meters, built entirely using a dry stone construction technique that relies on no mortar, cement, or any other binding agent whatsoever to hold the individual stones together. At its peak, the wider city is estimated to have supported a population of somewhere between 10 and 18,000 people, making it one of the largest urban settlements anywhere on the African continent during this period, and the surrounding landscape still bears the remains of numerous smaller satellite stone enclosures that once housed the broader population living beyond the walls of the central royal complex. This dry stone technique required builders to carefully select and shape individual granite blocks, quarried from naturally occurring rock formations in the surrounding hills that tend to fracture along relatively straight, even plains due to the specific geological structure of the local stone, and then fit these blocks together with a level of precision sufficient to create walls that remain structurally stable and self-supporting purely through the carefully calculated weight, angle, and friction of the individual stones pressing against one another without any adhesive substance filling the gaps between them. Some sections of the Great Enclosure's walls also feature decorative patterns created by deliberately alternating the orientation of individual stone courses, along with a distinctive chevron pattern incorporated into certain sections, demonstrating that this construction technique was refined enough to accommodate genuine artistic and decorative consideration, alongside its more basic structural requirements. For much of the 20th century, European colonial-era researchers and administrators, operating under deeply prejudiced assumptions regarding the capabilities of African societies, proposed a range of alternative theories suggesting that Great Zimbabwe must have been built by some other civilization entirely, variously suggested to include Phoenicians, ancient Egyptians, or a lost tribe with origins outside the African continent, theories that were ultimately and thoroughly discredited by rigorous archaeological research conducted across the following decades, which conclusively demonstrated, through careful excavation, radiocarbon dating, and detailed comparative analysis of pottery, tools, and other material culture recovered at the site, that Great Zimbabwe was indisputably built, occupied, and eventually expanded by local Shona ancestors over a period of several centuries, reaching its peak as a major regional trading centre, with documented trade connections extending as far as the East African coast, and from there through established Indian Ocean trade networks all the way to markets in Persia, India, and China. Excavators working at the site have recovered genuine physical evidence supporting these long-distance trade connections directly, including fragments of imported Chinese porcelain, Persian pottery, and glass beads originating from as far away as the Indian subcontinent, alongside locally produced gold jewellery and cattle bones, indicating that Great Zimbabwe's economy rested on a genuinely successful combination of cattle herding, gold trading, and its strategic position along inland trade routes connecting the African interior to the wider Indian Ocean trading world. The site's eventual decline and abandonment, occurring sometime around the 15th century, is generally attributed by researchers to a combination of environmental pressures, including possible soil depletion, and a documented significant regional shift in long-distance trade routes moving further north along the African coastline, rather than to any single catastrophic event, leaving behind a stone city whose walls, built without a single drop of mortar, have nonetheless withstood many centuries of weather and time far better than many considerably more recently constructed buildings using modern materials. From an African city built entirely of carefully fitted stone, we travel now to the mountains of Bolivia, to a site where the stonework achieves a level of precision so extreme that visitors have long assumed, quite wrongly, that no human civilization could possibly have produced it without some kind of technological assistance far beyond what its builders are known to have possessed. Number 5. Puma Punku's stonework, located near Lake Titicaca in the Bolivian highlands, at an elevation of roughly 13,000 feet above sea level. The archaeological site of Puma Punku forms part of the larger pre-Columbian Tiwanaku civilization, which reached its peak of political and cultural influence across the surrounding Andean region sometime between roughly 500 and 1000 CE. The site itself formed one part of a much larger ceremonial complex, positioned near Tiwanaku's central urban core, and likely connected to it by a series of formal causeways and canals, suggesting that Puma Punku served as a significant religious or administrative centre in its own right, rather than an isolated structure built in unusual geographic isolation. What makes Puma Punku so consistently astonishing to visitors, including many professional archaeologists and engineers who have studied the site closely, is the genuinely extraordinary precision found in a number of surviving carved stone blocks, cut from andesite and red sandstone with perfectly flat surfaces, precisely matched right angles, and complex interlocking notches and grooves, carved with a level of geometric consistency that would be considered impressive even using modern industrial cutting tools, let alone the stone, bronze, and copper implements known to have been available to the Tiwanaku people during this general period. Many of these carved blocks feature a distinctive, repeating pattern of geometric shapes, including precisely cut rectangular depressions and evenly spaced holes drilled to a genuinely consistent depth and diameter, arranged in a manner suggesting that individual stone blocks were originally designed to interlock together with other similarly carved blocks, potentially forming larger prefabricated wall sections or structural elements that could be assembled, and quite possibly disassembled and reassembled elsewhere, somewhat like an enormous three-dimensional stone puzzle, a construction approach that would have offered genuine practical advantages for a civilization needing to transport and assemble massive stone structures at high altitude without the benefit of any wheeled vehicle suited to the region's difficult mountainous terrain. Modern experimental archaeology conducted at the site has demonstrated that the Tiwanaku people did indeed possess tools and techniques capable of producing this level of precision, including specific varieties of extremely hard stone hammers and abrasive sand used in combination with water for the fine grinding and polishing of the harder andesite blocks. A slow, painstaking process that would have required an enormous, carefully organized investment of skilled labor and time for each individual finished stone, but one that is nonetheless entirely consistent with known ancient stoneworking methods rather than requiring any presently unexplained or otherwise unaccounted for technology. The Tiwanaku civilization that built Puma Punku eventually collapsed sometime around 1000 CE, likely connected to a documented, sustained period of regional drought that would have devastated the intensive raised field agricultural system the civilization depended on to feed a population living at such a challenging high altitude, leaving behind a partially completed complex whose full original scale and purpose were already becoming difficult for later Andean peoples to fully understand within only a few centuries of its abandonment. What remains genuinely more mysterious than the specific cutting technique itself is the question of exactly how such enormous, precisely finished stone blocks, some individually weighing well over 100 tons, were transported from their original quarry sites, located in some cases many miles distant from Puma Punku, up to this remote and challenging high-altitude location, a transportation challenge that researchers generally believe was accomplished using a combination of human labour, wooden rollers or sledges, and quite possibly llama-based transport for smaller loads, though the exact logistics involved in moving the very largest individual stones remain a subject of genuine ongoing archaeological study and reasonable scholarly debate. From stones cut with an almost impossible geometric precision high in the Bolivian mountains, we travel now to the flat, arid desert plain of southern Peru, where an entirely different and equally baffling form of ancient precision was carved not into stone, but directly into the earth itself, on a scale so enormous that it can only be properly appreciated from high above the ground. Number 4. The Nazca Lines. Etched into the arid desert plain of southern Peru, primarily between roughly 500 BCE and 500 CE by the Nazca culture that flourished in the region during this period. An extensive collection of enormous geoglyphs, some depicting straight lines stretching for many miles across the landscape, others forming intricate, recognizable images of animals, including a hummingbird, a monkey, a spider, and a whale, along with a range of geometric shapes and spiral patterns, together cover an area of roughly 200 square miles of the Nazca Desert, a scale of ground-based artwork that makes many of the individual figures genuinely difficult or impossible to properly recognize and appreciate from ground level, becoming clearly identifiable only when viewed from a considerable height, whether from a nearby hillside, an aircraft flying overhead, or, in the modern era, satellite imagery. The lines themselves were created using a comparatively straightforward but genuinely labour-intensive technique, involving the removal of a layer of reddish-brown, iron oxide-coated surface stones and gravel, exposing the lighter-coloured yellowish-grey soil directly underneath, creating a visible contrast that has remained remarkably stable and legible for well over 1,500 years, largely thanks to the region's unusually dry, stable climate and minimal rainfall, which has meant very little natural erosion has occurred to gradually blur or erase the exposed lines over the many centuries since their original creation. Some researchers studying the Nazca people's likely design process have proposed that the larger animal figures may have first been worked out at a smaller, more manageable scale, possibly on a nearby surface or using a simplified sketch, before being carefully scaled up and transferred to the desert floor using a grid-based or proportional measuring method, a technique that would explain the impressive geometric consistency of figures far too large for any single worker to have visually judged correctly from ground level while creating them. Archaeological and experimental research has demonstrated that the largest, most complex figures could plausibly have been laid out with reasonable accuracy using comparatively simple surveying methods, including wooden stakes and cords used to establish straight reference lines and consistent proportional measurements, methods that do not require any aerial vantage point or advanced mathematical technology to execute successfully, even though the finished results are genuinely difficult to fully appreciate from anywhere except high above the ground. The specific purpose behind the Nazca lines remains a subject of genuine ongoing scholarly research and reasonable disagreement, with proposed theories including a connection to astronomical observation, potentially marking the position of certain stars or the sun at specific, culturally significant times of the year, a role in religious ceremonies connected to water and fertility, an understandably urgent concern for a farming society living within one of the driest deserts anywhere on the planet, and a possible function as walking paths used during ritual processions, a theory partly supported by physical evidence of foot traffic patterns worn into some of the lines themselves. In recent years, researchers using drone photography and, in some cases, artificial intelligence models trained specifically to identify the subtle surface patterns characteristic of a genuine geoglyph, have continued discovering entirely new figures within the wider Nazca Desert region that had gone completely unnoticed for well over 1,000 years, some so faint and so degraded by centuries of exposure that they are barely visible even from directly overhead. A reminder that the full scope of what the Nazca people actually created may still not be completely mapped or understood even today. What can be said with considerably more confidence is that the Nazca people accomplished this genuinely enormous undertaking using simple hand tools and straightforward surveying methods, refined and applied with remarkable consistency across many individual figures and multiple successive generations of builders, producing a body of monumental ground-based artwork whose true full extent and meaning were not properly appreciated by the outside world until the 20th century. Once human beings had finally developed the ability to fly high enough above the Peruvian desert to see for the first time exactly what earlier generations of Nazca artists had already known was there all along. From patterns visible only from the sky, we return now to Egypt and to the single most famous ancient structure on this entire list, a pyramid built with a level of precision so exacting that surveyors using modern equipment still find themselves impressed by measurements taken more than 4,500 years ago. Number 3. The Great Pyramid's precision. Constructed during the reign of the Egyptian pharaoh Khufu, sometime around 2560 BCE, the Great Pyramid of Giza originally stood at a height of roughly 481 feet, making it the tallest human-made structure anywhere on Earth for well over 3,800 years afterward, a record that would not be surpassed until the completion of Lincoln Cathedral's central spire in medieval England. The pyramid was constructed from an estimated 2.3 million individual limestone and granite blocks, with the largest granite blocks used within its internal chambers weighing as much as 80 tons each, quarried from sites located considerable distances away and transported to the Giza Plateau using a combination of river barges along the Nile and overland sledges pulled across specially prepared, deliberately moistened surfaces designed to reduce friction, broadly similar to the transportation methods discussed earlier in relation to Egyptian obelisks. Originally, the entire pyramid was covered in a smooth outer layer of polished white limestone casing stones, quarried from a site across the Nile and cut with such precision that the joints between adjacent stones reportedly allowed barely enough space to slide a thin blade between them, a finishing layer that would have made the completed monument gleam brilliantly under the desert sun and would have been visible from a considerable distance across the surrounding landscape. Most of this original casing was removed many centuries later during the medieval period and repurposed as building material for construction projects in nearby Cairo, leaving behind only the rougher core structure of the pyramid that visitors see today, along with a small number of surviving casing stones still in place near its base that give a genuine sense of just how smooth and precisely fitted the entire original exterior surface must once have appeared. Modern surveying of the pyramid's base has revealed a genuinely remarkable degree of geometric precision, with the four sides of the structure's square base varying in length from one another by less than 8 inches across a total base length of over 750 feet on each side, representing an error margin of well under 1/10%. The pyramid's four sides are also aligned with the four cardinal compass directions, north, south, east, and west, with a precision of within a small fraction of 1 degree, an alignment that ancient Egyptian surveyors most likely achieved through careful, patient astronomical observation, potentially involving the tracking of specific circumpolar stars across the night sky to establish true north with genuine accuracy rather than relying on any magnetic compass, a device that would not be developed in Egypt or anywhere else in the ancient Mediterranean world for many centuries afterward. The pyramid's internal structure includes an elaborate system of passages and chambers, along with a series of so-called relieving chambers positioned directly above the king's chamber, consisting of stacked granite slabs specifically designed to redirect the enormous weight of the pyramid's remaining upper structure away from the ceiling of the chamber below, preventing it from collapsing under the sheer mass of stone pressing down from above. A genuinely sophisticated structural engineering solution that demonstrates a real, practical understanding of how weight and stress distribute themselves through a massive stone structure. Archaeological excavation of a substantial workers' settlement located near the base of the Giza Plateau, including evidence of organized bakeries, breweries, and medical treatment facilities capable of setting broken bones, has provided genuine physical support for the idea that the pyramid's construction relied on a large, reasonably well-fed, and at least somewhat medically cared-for workforce rather than an enslaved population subjected to unrelieved brutal treatment, a picture considerably more nuanced than the popular image many people still carry from older films and television depictions of pyramid construction. Exactly how the ancient Egyptians organized the labor force needed to complete this project, generally now believed by most researchers to have been staffed primarily by skilled, paid laborers organized into competing work crews rather than by slaves, as earlier popular assumptions had long suggested, and exactly which specific combination of ramps, levers, and sledges were used to lift and place stone blocks at increasingly greater heights as construction progressed, remains a subject of genuine ongoing archaeological research and reasonable scholarly debate, since no single ancient Egyptian text has survived that fully documents the entire construction method from start to finish. What is not in serious dispute is the sheer scale of the underlying achievement, a monument built with a level of geometric precision, structural engineering sophistication, and coordinated human labor that modern engineers, working with the full benefit of laser surveying equipment and heavy machinery, still describe as a genuinely humbling accomplishment to fully replicate using anything resembling the tools and techniques actually available in Bronze Age Egypt. Having covered so many genuinely remarkable and well-documented ancient achievements, it seems only fair, before we close out this list, to spend a little time on two supposed ancient technologies that have captured enormous public imagination over the years, largely thanks to sensationalized claims that, on closer and more careful examination, simply do not hold up. Number 2, the Saqqara bird, discovered in 1898 within a tomb at the ancient Egyptian burial complex of Saqqara and dated to approximately 200 BCE, a small carved wooden object, roughly 6 inches in length, resembling a bird with outstretched wings, sat largely unremarked upon in an Egyptian museum collection for decades, before an Egyptian doctor and aviation enthusiast, examining the object more closely during the 1960s, proposed a genuinely striking theory that the object's unusual wing shape, its flattened non-anatomical wing profile bearing little resemblance to the wings of any actual bird species, along with its notably absent tail feathers, suggested it may represent an ancient Egyptian model of some form of functional glider or aircraft built using genuine aerodynamic principles that would not otherwise be formally understood and documented anywhere in the world for well over 2,000 years afterward. This theory generated a considerable wave of popular fascination once it began circulating more widely, particularly given the genuinely striking visual resemblance between the Saqqara bird's flattened wing profile and the wing shape used on many early 20th century aircraft designs. And some proponents of the theory went further still, suggesting the object might represent physical evidence that ancient Egyptian civilization had developed some genuine, if presumably limited, understanding of powered or unpowered flight. However, when the object was subjected to more rigorous scientific and aerodynamic testing during subsequent decades, including scaled physical replica testing conducted specifically to evaluate its actual flight characteristics, researchers found that the object, as originally discovered, entirely lacked any horizontal tail stabilizer, a component that is functionally essential for any genuinely stable glider or aircraft design, without which the object would tumble and spin uncontrollably rather than gliding in anything resembling a controlled, stable manner, regardless of who might attempt to throw or launch it. Egyptologists studying the broader context of similar objects recovered from Egyptian tombs have also pointed out that carved wooden bird figures with a similarly stylized, simplified wing shape were commonly produced throughout ancient Egypt for straightforward religious and symbolic purposes, frequently representing specific Egyptian deities closely associated with birds, such as Horus, or serving a more general decorative or votive function within tomb offerings intended to accompany the deceased into the afterlife, meaning the Saqqara bird's distinctive wing shape most likely reflects an established, well-documented, ancient Egyptian artistic convention for stylized bird carving generally, rather than representing any genuine, if limited, attempt at aerodynamic engineering specifically. When enthusiasts and researchers went on to build enlarged, powered replicas of the object specifically to test its flight capability more directly, the results were consistently poor, with test versions proving either entirely incapable of sustained flight or requiring substantial design modifications, including the addition of an artificial tail section never present on the original object before achieving anything resembling stable, controlled flight, further undermining the idea that the original wooden carving was ever intended or understood by its makers as a functional model of an aircraft. While the Saqqara bird continues to appear regularly in popular media and internet discussions specifically focused on supposed ancient advanced technology, the overwhelming consensus among professional Egyptologists and aviation engineers who have studied the object closely is that it represents an ordinary, symbolically significant piece of ancient Egyptian religious artwork, and not, as more sensationalized accounts have long suggested, evidence of any actual functional ancient aircraft or genuine understanding of aerodynamic flight. From a wooden bird whose flight never truly existed outside of popular imagination, we close out this list with two of the most persistently repeated and most thoroughly debunked claims of supposedly forgotten ancient technology, a pair of stories that continue to circulate widely online despite having been quite comprehensively addressed by mainstream historians and archaeologists many years ago. Number 1. The Baghdad Battery and the Dendera Lights. Discovered sometime during the 1930s near the city of Baghdad in what is now Iraq, and generally dated to somewhere between roughly 250 BCE and 250 CE, a small ceramic vessel measuring only a few inches in height, containing a copper cylinder and an iron rod positioned inside it, became known in later decades as the so-called Baghdad Battery, after a museum curator proposed in 1938 that the object, if filled with an acidic liquid such as vinegar or grape juice, could theoretically function as a simple galvanic cell, generating a small electrical current through the same basic chemical principle used in a modern battery. The vessel was recovered as part of a broader archaeological survey of the region during a period when European and Iraqi archaeologists were actively excavating numerous Parthian-era sites across Mesopotamia, and it initially attracted comparatively little attention until the curator in question, examining it years later within a museum storeroom, noticed its unusual internal construction and proposed the electrical interpretation that would eventually make the object famous. This theory generated enormous popular fascination once it became more widely known, since it raised the genuinely provocative possibility that some ancient civilization in Mesopotamia may have possessed a working understanding of basic electrochemistry well over 1,000 years before Alessandro Volta would formally develop the first true modern battery in the year 1800. However, when historians and archaeologists examined the object's actual historical and archaeological context more carefully, considerable doubt emerged regarding this dramatic interpretation. No ancient text from Mesopotamia or anywhere else in the ancient world makes any reference whatsoever to electricity, electroplating, or any other practical application that would have required a functioning source of electrical current, and the object itself closely resembles a known and reasonably common type of ancient container used for storing sacred scrolls or important documents, with the copper cylinder and iron rod inside plausibly explained as a container designed to protect and preserve a rolled papyrus or parchment document from moisture damage, rather than as any deliberately engineered electrical device. While modern researchers have indeed successfully demonstrated that a replica of the object, filled with an appropriately acidic liquid, can produce a small measurable electrical voltage, the mere physical capability to generate a weak electrical current does not, on its own, constitute solid evidence that this was the object's actual intended ancient purpose, since numerous ordinary, non-electrical objects can incidentally produce a similarly weak voltage under comparable conditions purely as an accidental byproduct of their basic material composition. A closely related and similarly sensationalized claim involves a series of stone relief carvings found within the Hathor Temple at Dendera in Egypt, depicting an elongated, lotus-shaped object connected by what some modern viewers have interpreted as a cable or wire to a nearby box-shaped structure. An image that some popular writers have proposed represents evidence of ancient Egyptian electric lighting technology. Beyond the more compelling religious interpretation, proponents of the electric lighting theory have also struggled to explain the complete absence of any archaeological evidence for the kind of supporting infrastructure such a technology would necessarily have required somewhere within the temple complex, including wiring, a power source capable of generating usable electrical current at any meaningful scale, or any surviving textual reference anywhere in Egyptian religious or administrative records describing lamps of this kind being used, manufactured, or maintained. Mainstream Egyptologists, however, have identified this same carved scene as a well-documented and clearly understood piece of traditional Egyptian religious symbolism, depicting a lotus flower, a symbol very commonly associated with creation and rebirth throughout ancient Egyptian religious art, giving rise to a serpent, itself frequently used to represent divine or cosmic energy within Egyptian mythology, an interpretation that lines up precisely and consistently with numerous other well-understood examples of similar religious imagery found throughout Egyptian temples of this same general period, and one that requires no unexplained modern technology whatsoever to make complete and coherent sense. Both the Baghdad Battery and the Dendera lights continue to generate considerable popular fascination and are unlikely to fully disappear from ongoing internet discussion anytime soon, precisely because the underlying question they raise, of forgotten or unrecognized ancient technological achievement, remains such a genuinely compelling one, even in these two specific cases where the more mundane, better documented historical explanation ultimately turns out to be the correct one. Looking back across everything covered tonight, from a corroded lump of bronze that turned out to be an ancient astronomical computer, to a Roman harbour still resting quietly on the floor of the Mediterranean, to a stone city in Africa built without a single drop of mortar, what stands out most is not any single impossible invention, but rather how many separate, unconnected human communities, working entirely independently of one another, kept arriving at genuinely sophisticated solutions to the practical problems immediately in front of them. Some of those solutions, like the Antikythera mechanism or the true recipe behind Greek fire, were eventually lost so completely that we may never fully recover them. Others, like Roman concrete or the phosphorus-rich iron of Delhi's pillar, were hiding in plain sight the entire time, simply waiting for modern chemistry to finally catch up and explain what ancient craftsmen had already managed to achieve through nothing more than patient, careful, generation-spanning trial and error. And a few, like the Saqqara bird or the Baghdad battery, remind us that the real, well-documented ingenuity of the ancient world rarely needs any exaggeration at all in order to remain genuinely astonishing. What ties every single one of these 30 stories together is not any hidden, forgotten source of extraordinary power, but something considerably more ordinary and, in its own way, considerably more moving. An enormous amount of patient, accumulated human attention, passed down carefully from one generation of craftsmen to the next, refined slowly through repeated failure and repeated small success, until an Indian furnace or a Roman harbour or a Bolivian quarry or a Greek workshop somewhere on the island of Rhodes quietly produced something that would go on to genuinely puzzle the people who eventually rediscovered it, centuries or even millennia later. None of these builders set out to create a mystery. They were simply solving the problem directly in front of them, using whatever materials, whatever furnace, whatever patch of ground happened to be available, with a level of care that, purely by accident, occasionally left something behind that the modern world still has not entirely caught up to. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.